Hello everyone, it's Miss Faye, and today we're going to be discussing the carbon cycle. The learning targets that we are covering are: I can analyze the movement of matter and energy through the carbon cycle, and I can predict the human impacts on environmental systems, specifically in terms of the carbon cycle. Now, when we're talking about carbon, carbon is an essential element that is present in all living things. In other words, it is one of the building blocks of life. Every single living organism, whether it be a plant or an animal or even bacteria, their bodies are made from several elements, and carbon is one of the main elements that makes up the bodies of living things. The food that we consume contains high amounts of carbon in it, carbohydrates especially. And the energy that we use to fuel our homes, to make electricity, all these fossil fuels that we burn in order to make electricity, to make our cars run, this all contains carbon. And carbon is a very important element. It's a very important atom that is found on our planet. Carbon is able to move through the different parts of our planet through the carbon cycle, and it essentially moves through the different spheres that we discussed last time. In addition, carbon has the ability to remain in these reservoirs or locations on our planet that hold high amounts of carbon. If you take a look at the picture down here, these are examples of different reservoirs of carbon found on Earth. The main reservoir of carbon is the ocean, and you'll notice that in terms of how many grams, or in this case, thousands of grams, of carbon, ocean holds the most amount. The second area that holds the second most amount of carbon is the soil. Okay, so the soil, including the land vegetation that live in the soil, and also the fossil fuels that exist underneath the soil, also hold high amounts of carbon. So if you remember, fossil fuels are made from the dead remains of organisms that used to live on our planet millions of years ago. Their bodies, so these organisms, whether it be plants or animals, they died off and their bodies essentially fossilized, which means that they turned into fossils, and then over millions and thousands of years of heat and pressure, their bodies become fossil fuels. In other words, oil and coal and natural gas that we see and use today. So fossil fuels and soil, and also the vegetation that live on soil, contain high amounts of carbon. They are also reservoirs. The final reservoir that I want to talk about today is the atmosphere. And the carbon that exists in the atmosphere, which is the layer of gases that surrounds our planet, the carbon that exists there is in the form of carbon dioxide or carbon monoxide. In other words, it is a gas form, okay? So the atmosphere holds carbon as a gas form, the most common being carbon dioxide. Now, we said that the carbon is able to move through the different parts of our planet using the carbon cycle, okay? And in terms of the carbon cycle today, I want you to be able to answer these two questions. What processes add carbon into the atmosphere, and what processes remove carbon from the atmosphere? Okay, so when we're talking about carbon here, I'm going to be, because remember, this carbon is found in the atmosphere, it's going to be in a gas form. So I'm talking about carbon dioxide here, all right? Although, like I said, carbon can also be present in other formats in the atmosphere, such as carbon monoxide. So in other words, let's focus on the first process that adds carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and it is respiration. If you remember, when organisms undergo the process of cellular respiration, their bodies take in food, okay, take in sugars, and break it down in the mitochondria. One gas that is released during the process of cellular respiration, or byproduct, is carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide gets breathed out. So when our bodies undergo cellular respiration, we breathe out carbon dioxide, because carbon dioxide is a toxic gas. You don't want it to stay inside of you. So all of this carbon dioxide that's being breathed out by you, by animals, by plants, by bacteria, okay? All the organisms on Earth are respiring, in other words, releasing carbon dioxide. All this carbon dioxide gets released and goes into the atmosphere. So therefore, cellular respiration and or respiration, is a process that releases or adds carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Okay? The second process that adds carbon dioxide into the atmosphere is feeding. Okay, essentially, what's going on here is plants use the process of photosynthesis to create sugars, to create glucose, which is their own food. And through this process, because glucose, if you remember the formula of glucose, it's C6H12O6. So basically, it contains carbon in there, right? Now, all this carbon that is present as a sugar form is going to be stored in the plants, in the tissue of the plants, in the ground tissue, if you remember. And basically, what that's going to do is when an animal feeds on a plant, or an animal feeds on an animal that has fed on a plant, they take that carbon. That carbon becomes fixated. It becomes part of their system as well, and it gets used for growth and development, etc. And some of it gets breathed out during cell respiration, like the cycle continues. So feeding, when an organism basically is taking in carbon from the food that they eat, and then because they break it down in cellular respiration, it gets released into the atmosphere. So this feeding then is indirectly, not directly, but it's indirectly adding carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. The next process that we're going to be talking about today, once this works, is combustion. Okay, so combustion is a non-natural method of adding carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. It's not something that happens in nature. This is something that we as humans have contributed to by burning fossil fuels. So when we burn fossil fuels, whether it be oil or coal or gas, this releases the carbon. Remember that all of these fossil fuels contain carbon in them because they used to they came from the remains of dead organisms, whether it be plants or animals. So when they are burned, the carbon that was in their bodies, or in other words, the carbon that was in the oil, in the coal, and in the gas gets released back into the atmosphere through the process of combustion. In other words, burning these fossil fuels. And this obviously leads to pollution, which is also a process that goes hand in hand with combustion. So combustion, pollution, burning of these fossil fuels also releases carbon back into the atmosphere. Unfortunately, in our present day, what's been going on is that as humans, after the Industrial Revolution, basically we started to use more and more machines, whether it be cars or machines that we use in our factories, because we started to improve as civilizations. We started to have more technologies. Our lives have become more and more advanced. And because we are using these technologies, whether it be cars or planes or machines that we use to be in our factories in order to make things that we need, all of these things require fossil fuels to work, okay? And the more and more we are using fossil fuels, the more we are releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And we are all well aware of the effects of this on our climate. This is leading to climate change. This is leading to something known as the greenhouse effect, which you will explore further. And I believe you've explored last year in middle school. But what's going on right now is this imbalance, all right? What does that mean? This means that as humans, we are releasing way more carbon dioxide and unnaturally, because remember, combustion is not a very natural process, we are releasing way more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere than is being taken away through natural processes, which we will talk about next. So this imbalance that's going on is leading to negative effects, which includes things like the rise in our global temperature and all of the consequences that come through and with that. Very interesting side note. Ever since the coronavirus situation started, and we know that it began in China, specifically in an area known as, or a city known as Wuhan. Wuhan is a city that is responsible for several factories that basically make a lot of the stuff that we use on a day-to-day basis. Most of the things we use, if you look at the label, where is it made? It's made in China, specifically also in that area, which is Wuhan, which is where this virus started. But anyways, because of the fact that this virus caused lockdowns there and it caused factories to kind of stop working, it has actually reduced the amount of carbon dioxide and the amount of pollution that existed in China. All right, so within the past 3 to 4 months, scientists have noted a reduction, okay, a considerable reduction in the amount of carbon dioxide that existed. So this just goes to show that what is causing this huge imbalance in the amount of carbon dioxide emissions, it is not really, obviously it's on us as individual consumers, but also it's these huge factories that are releasing huge amounts of carbon dioxide into the air. Other things also include planes, right? So people are traveling less, and you can imagine just how much carbon dioxide these planes are emitting into the atmosphere. All of that has went down ever since this crisis started. So I guess there is a silver lining to this whole situation. So another process that releases carbon dioxide is decomposition. As decomposition is the breaking down of live organic, or not live, it's the breaking down of organic matter. In other words, it's the breakdown of the bodies of dead organisms, whether it be plants or animals, or other organisms like bacteria. So essentially, bacteria, and there's certain types of insects and other decomposers such as fungus. All of these organisms collectively are known as decomposers, and they're extremely important. We already talked about their importance previously, but here we're seeing another very crucial importance to decomposers. They are able to break down the bodies of organisms, and they release the carbon that used to be present in these organisms and the bodies of these organisms back into the soil, so it can be used by plants, so it can be used by other organisms, and some of it also gets released back into the atmosphere so that it can be used by plants once again through the process of photosynthesis. So when decomposition happens, it also leads to fossilization, which I said is connected to the formation of fossil fuels. So you can see how really everything here, the majority of processes here, are really connected to one another and to other processes. So decomposition adds carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere non-directly. Once again, we see that. And it is important for the carbon cycle because it is able to break down the carbon that is stored in the bodies of these organisms once they die, so that the carbon can go back into the soil and then eventually find its way back to the atmosphere. All right, next we're going to be looking at processes that remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So the first one I want to talk about is photosynthesis. And we already know what photosynthesis is, so I'm not going to go too deeply into that. But basically, as plants undergo photosynthesis, as they take in sunlight and use it, harness it in order to create their own food, in other words, glucose and other sugars, they one of the reactants for this entire process is carbon dioxide, and we already know that. So they absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere in order to undergo photosynthesis, which is great because it means that all of this carbon dioxide that is found in the atmosphere, not all of it, but a lot of it, gets taken in by the plants. In other words, it's almost like filtering out the carbon dioxide that is in the atmosphere, and the plants are using them for their benefit. You'll notice that next to the plant, in addition to having that green arrow, which represents photosynthesis, we also have that red arrow, which represents cellular respiration. So this is showing you that even though plants do take in carbon dioxide for photosynthesis, they also do release carbon dioxide as well, because remember, plants are living things, so they undergo cellular respiration as well as photosynthesis. Okay, next is sedimentation. Now, sedimentation is the process of taking carbon that has entered the ocean and combining it with other particles or sediments that are present in the ocean in order to form things like specific types of stones and shells. So limestones and shells. Limestone is a specific kind of stone that is found in the ocean and other areas in the world. But basically, limestone and all the shells that you see in the ocean, that is all made through the process of sedimentation. And without carbon, a lot of the rocks and the rock formations that we see on our planet, whether it be in the ocean or outside, would not exist. So sedimentation, the formation of rocks, the formation of sand, the formation of limestone and shells, all occurs through the process of or with the help of carbon. This is another process that removes carbon dioxide. Now, like I mentioned, as humans, our activity is really impacting the carbon cycle. And I said through the excessive burning of fossil fuels such as oil, coal, and natural gas, when we burn these fossil fuels, through the process of combustion, these fossil fuels are released back into the atmosphere. And now we have this kind of imbalance going on where we have too much carbon dioxide being released in the atmosphere, and that's, not enough or not as much carbon dioxide being taken away or basically recycled back into the soil, back into organisms such as plants, etc. So this is an issue, and this is an issue, and it leads to so many consequences, which you're going to be looking at through the activity that I'm going to be posting alongside this video. Okay, guys. So let me explain how the Jigsaw activity is going to work. Now, obviously, this is a bit different than the regular Jigsaw activity that you would do in the classroom. So instead, I decided to come up with this modified version. So the first thing you're going to be doing, as it says here in the instructions, is you're going to be watching the video. It's a very short video just to kind of introduce the idea of human impact on the carbon cycle. You will then be assigned one article from the 5 articles below to read. So you'll notice we have Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, 4, and 5. And basically, if you scroll down to the last page right here, you will see the article that you were assigned to read. So for example, let's say I'm in 9B and I'm Aisha. So if I'm Aisha, I know that I will be reading Article 1. Faisal, for example, will be reading Article 2. All of these people in green here will be reading Article 3. All of these people will be reading Article 4, and so on and so forth. All right? So once you're done reading your article, you're going to, just like it says here, you're going to create a short Flipgrid video response explaining what you learned from the reading. All right, so you can obviously customize the Flipgrid video by adding things like photos, captions, filters, stickers, whatever you feel necessary to make your video as engaging as possible. Try to make your video short. So I had the time set to 10 minutes, to 5 minutes, sorry, but try your best to make it as concise and to the point as possible. Your job in the video is to explain your article. So you want to summarize what was the main thing you learned from the article, and you want to share that with through your video with whoever is going to be watching. Some of the articles have videos that you need to watch, and some of them have pictures. You can actually include those pictures in your video. You can include, if you'd like, parts of the videos or information that you gained from the videos as well into your Flipgrid submissions. Okay, so once you have your Flipgrid submission done, you're going to attach it, or you're going to upload it to the correct page. So once you have your Flipgrid submission inputted into the Flipgrid page, you're going to be watching video responses on the remaining topics or the remaining articles that you did not read. Okay, so what does that mean? Let's say that I was assigned Article 1 to read. So I read Article 1. I watched the video because it says to watch a video here. I made sure I looked at the picture and understood what it's showing. And then I recorded my video on Flipgrid. I attached it. Next, once everyone else has submitted their videos, you're going to go into Flipgrid and you're going to watch so whoever posted about Article 2, you can choose. There's going to be more than one person. So you can choose to watch all of them, or you can just choose to watch one. And you're going to be you're going to be watching a submission on Article 2, a submission on Article 3, 4, and 5, because I didn't read those articles. I don't know what they're about. All right. So instead of me reading the article, all of them, because that would be like kind of boring, it's much more fun to just listen to someone explain it, summarize it. Okay, you have to summarize it. That's why I said keep your videos short, because you don't want to bore them. All right, you don't want to have it too long, because then what's the point? They could just read the article. It's probably easier. So, anyways, once you've done that, once you've watched all the videos for the articles that you did not read, you're going to write a short summary, very short, so it doesn't have to be more than 4 sentences, about what you learned on the remaining topics, okay? And you're going to attach the summaries to this assignment. You can, if you want to include it on the last page, go ahead, okay? Or you can just attach a new document onto the assignment itself. All right, so I hope that was clear. If you have any more questions, please feel free to ask me. See